All right, today we're putting on our detective hats. We're diving deep into some ancient Buddhist scriptures to solve a mystery that has, believe it or not, puzzled scholars for decades. And this whole investigation is based on the incredible work of Bhikkhu Sunyo. So get this. What if one tiny missing punctuation mark, like a period, could completely change our understanding of a key teaching on enlightenment? It sounds a little dramatic, I know, but that's exactly what's at stake here. This is a high-stakes linguistic detective story, so let's jump right into the evidence. So our whole investigation really kicks off with a little two-word mystery that has started a surprisingly big debate. Okay, here they are, the two words at the center of it all. Viññāṇa Anidassana. Now, on the surface, they're just a couple of words in the Pali language, but listen to how scholars have tried to translate them. Consciousness without feature, signless consciousness, invisible consciousness, even non-manifesting consciousness. When you see a range like that, it tells you one thing really clearly. Nobody's exactly sure what these words mean. It's a real puzzle. And here's what it all boils down to. The whole debate comes down to two big theories. One side claims that viññāṇa Anidassana is actually a kind of secret poetic name for Nibbāna, the ultimate goal, final enlightenment. But the other side says, whoa, hold on a second. It's not that at all. It's just describing a very specific and temporary state of deep meditation. And the difference between those two is, well, it's huge.
Right off the bat, that Nibbāna theory runs into some serious problems. As our source, Bhikkhu Sunyo, points out, there's not a single early Buddhist text or sutta that says Nibbāna is a form of consciousness. In fact, there are hundreds of texts that say the exact opposite, that Nibbāna involves the cessation, the end of consciousness. And maybe the biggest red flag? This phrase. This supposedly core concept only shows up twice in the entire collection of early scriptures. That's a really shaky foundation to build a major doctrine on. To really crack this case, we have to go to the scene of the crime, so to speak. It's a text called the Kevaddha Sutta, and it tells this really strange story about a monk's cosmic journey.
So the story goes like this. There's this monk who goes on this wild journey, traveling up through all the different heavenly realms, looking for an answer to a single question. He asks all the gods he meets, but nobody has a clue. He finally gets to the very top, to the highest heaven, and he asks the great god Brahma himself. And even Brahma is stumped.
So what was this impossible question? Well, here it is. He was asking where the four great elements, which in ancient India basically meant all of physical reality, where do they completely and permanently stop existing? He's really asking, where does the physical universe just end? Brahma, having no answer, sends the monk back to the Buddha. And this, right here, is our first huge clue in the investigation. The Buddha tells him, you're asking the wrong question. Instead of asking where the elements cease without remnant, which implies they're gone forever, he changes the wording to where they find no footing. Now, that shift from permanent ending to a temporary state, it's super subtle, but it is absolutely critical to solving this mystery. And that brings us right to the heart of it all. We're now looking at the 6th-line verse, where our mystery words show up, and where one little piece of punctuation changes literally everything. See, the problem is that the original ancient manuscripts didn't have punctuation. No periods, no question marks, nothing. So for centuries, everyone read this verse as one long, single answer. And it's incredibly confusing. It seems to say that this boundless consciousness is both where the physical world finds no footing and where the mind and body completely cease to exist. That's a massive contradiction to pretty much everything else the Buddha taught. It's a real head-scratcher. But watch what happens if you just add one little period right there in the middle. Boom, the whole riddle just dissolves. The verse splits perfectly into two separate questions, each with its own simple, standard answer. What was once this unique, baffling passage suddenly becomes two very well-known, straightforward Buddhist teachings. It's a total aha moment. And the evidence for this two-answer structure is rock solid. I mean, the two parts of the verse use completely different verbs for a reason. And the answers are talking about opposite concepts. One is about the existence of a type of consciousness, and the other is about the cessation of all consciousness. Plus, from a purely grammatical standpoint in the original Pali, it just makes way more sense this way. So what is this boundless consciousness then? Well, Bhikkhu Sunyo argues it's a very well-known specific meditative state. It's a super advanced, formless state of concentration, where perceptions of the physical world temporarily can't get in. They find no footing, which is exactly what the Buddha's rephrased question asked. It's an incredibly profound state for sure, but it's temporary. It isn't permanent Nibbāna. Okay, so a good detective always looks for corroborating evidence, right? You don't just rely on one clue. So let's cross-examine some other texts and see if this new interpretation actually holds up. Now check this out. This is pretty much the smoking gun. In a totally different text, the Ajita's Question Sutta, we find a verse that is almost identical to the second half of our mystery verse. And you know what's missing? There is no mention of viññāṇa Anidassana anywhere. This basically proves that the teaching about how mind and matter cease is a standalone concept, totally separate from our two mystery words.
Now we do have to deal with that one other place the phrase pops up, a text called the Brahmani Mantanika Sutta. But this sutta is, well, it's known for being incredibly abstract, really complex, and frankly, kind of weird. And that alone makes it a pretty sketchy place to find the definition for a core doctrine, which you'd normally expect to see laid out clearly and repeated often.
And Bhikkhu Sunyo gives us 3 solid ways to understand this second text that don't mess up our main theory. First, the context of the passage suggests the word all might just mean all things that have physical form. Second, if you look closely at different manuscript versions, it's actually possible the confusing lines were spoken by the god Brahma, not by the Buddha. And third, the entire text might just be a later, more niche composition, meaning it's not the most reliable record of what the Buddha originally said. So, after examining the crime scene, looking at all the clues, and cross-examining the evidence, it's time to deliver the final verdict in the case of the 2 mystery words.
And the verdict is in. Viññāṇa Anidassana is not a secret name for Nibbāna. It is a poetic, almost metaphorical description of a very specific, formless, and temporary meditative state. A profound step on the path, yes, but not the final goal itself. The mystery is solved.
But really, the takeaway here is so much bigger than just these 2 words. Bhikkhu Sunyo is highlighting a really important principle for reading any ancient text. It's what the Buddha called the miracle of instruction. Basically, when you find 1 or 2 passages that are really obscure and hard to understand, you shouldn't build a whole new theory around them. Instead, you should always try to interpret them in a way that fits with the hundreds of other passages that are perfectly clear.
And that leaves us with one last, kind of mind-bending thought. If a single, tiny, missing period could hide the meaning of a teaching for centuries, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other ancient truths, in texts from all over the world, might just be hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to take a fresh look at the punctuation?